audio, but here we are. I got the strings, so it makes it easier. We're in the Baja tonight, and we're very well illuminated. But hey, hi, how's it going? I have been working on this stuff, and usual thing between coffee and trail mix and everything else, just trying to get through this particular project, which is really fun. We're having a breakfast blend, or no, French roast actually. I found this stuff at this other grocery store. It's very economical, I tell you. I could run on coffee and almost nothing else really. Coffee and tofu, that would be it, But and maybe a vitamin once in a while. Might have to try that. Tonight we're running on pure code and adrenaline. I'm checking the screen. There I am. They're looking okay. Sign is going in candle style. If I noticed, if I change it, the camera is super sensitive and like changes its balance, even though I've got all these other lights going, so it's hilarious. It is what it is. You need serious illumination to do this video stuff, or you can get mellow. I could do all the background, get some lights on, make it really atmospheric in here. Get some incense burning, get all that going on. Put a few more 3D printed Buddhas up. That would be nice. I wouldn't mind doing that. So here we are. Let me bring up what I've been working on. This is its current, not its final form, but probably even this is affecting the camera balance, just having this on my face. Yeah, so here's what we've got. At the moment, this is one earlier version of the style. I think now if I do a reload, it will look different because I've been editing. Yeah, so now it picks up the color from the top instead. I rounded the filter box, which I don't know. Some people like it, some people don't. And everything else is about the same. I put a little icon on all the categories, and I gave the ability to, finally this works, put a little triangle on there. So sometimes it looks like there's two icons on the thing, especially with Delta, but you can click with the Alt key held down, or Option, and it will hide and show all, as you would expect if you're used to that behavior. Yeah, this is pretty much how it is now. Let me show all, but yeah, the filter is working pretty well. Heat, and so I hide the groups that are empty. And what else is going on with it? Oh, I fixed up the fields so that if you try to type like, in an integer field, 256x, it doesn't like it. I might make a little thing where you can click a box to allow an exception for typing in something else, or I can just like allow symbols to be typed in, because or maybe just check it when you leave the box instead of when you're typing directly. But I fixed it up so that you can't get rid of the end quote on a string, although that one's not quite working. It's almost working. I'm gonna fix that up, but yeah, it's supposed to fix it up so that if you try to remove the last quote, it puts a quote back, but I don't know. It's kind of screwy right now. But there's some things like that I'm working on. But most of the behaviors are good. I think if you try to get rid of this closing brace, it puts it back. So, it sort of tries to prevent silly errors. Of course, the better way to do this would be if you had an array of like this. You would just put multiple boxes, and then you just say, oh, I want to add more boxes, and it would have a little widget to add more boxes. And so you couldn't screw it up. It would just definitely end up, because everything that gets sent by this is just, the form figures out how to package it, how to present it, it decides. So I've just sort of started filling out, changing them from text fields to other types of fields. So one example is, I probably showed you this, or I might not have showed you this. before. But I changed this to a search box, so it does have a little X in it. I don't know if I showed that, but let's see. One of the things that it did was, let's see. Oh yeah, I found these widgets. I think, yeah, I probably went through this whole stream where I was trying to change the size of this thing. But I got it finally sorted out. I got the size about right. It might be a little bit asymmetrical. I think it is. Oh, it's imperfect. Must fix. So, we'll fix that up. But yeah, it's basically that. And so now you got these widgets. So what, of course, happens is it's really a simple, straightforward web app situation. You have, basically, there's a sort of a client server or provider kind of situation. There's a provider that goes away if I don't save this and now or close the window. The provider is gone, the web view is gone, it's all gone. That's the thing about web apps, they can bootstrap really quick. So when you open up this, it actually creates the provider, does everything, sends, and it goes through this whole process. And I think I finally sorted out the full order of how it does it, and I put a bunch of comments in the code. The one thing I'm almost sorted out is remembering how to switch windows when I want to edit versus when I want to do other things. I'm going to try and maybe I can switch themes, and it applies to all the windows. VS Code, I think we could probably fix that up. We could probably fix that up to make it so that when you select a theme, it applies not to the entire app, but to just one window. But yeah, that's my favorite thing to do, is switch through the themes and see how they look and see that everything is laying out correctly. Of course, they don't change the layout much or anything like that. It's all very basic. It's just is what it is. And so you're pretty well guaranteed. And the other things I'm guaranteed about are, like, I was really shy, I think I mentioned in the last stream, about just using every feature, because you don't know where every feature is going to be. So there was that. Anyway, while I've got you, well, I've got this going on. Let's get ourselves started on the live stream. Excuse me, haven't had enough coffee. It was a good loogie. So how is everyone today? What a time we're having in history and everything else. Hold on while I'm going to upgrade Discord, because why not, right? We have all the bandwidth in the world now. Let's use it. So I heard from my friend Lou. Lou says hi. Well, he doesn't actually, but I'm sure if I tell him that you're here, he'll tell me to say hi. So, yeah, we were just gabbing about Westworld, which this season is a little, it's a little cringy in ways. Of course, if you haven't seen it, I won't spoil it, but there's just things that are a little cringy. It's still very compelling. Everybody's performances are pretty, for the most part, are pretty good. Ed Harris is always just, you can't take your eyes off him. He's menacing as the Man in Black and all that. And actually, he's picked up a lot from, like, there's a lot of little nods to the original movie and in this particular season. Regarding the Man in Black, because you didn't get enough of his Man in Blackness, so to speak, in past seasons. He's finally being more Man in Blacky, and I don't know. He'll probably stop talking and have silvery eyes and all that in some future. And then I guess he'll get acid thrown on him and lit on fire too, and all that will happen. Of course, there's again, I won't spoil anything, but it's hard. He's hard to kill. Let's just say that he's a hard to kill guy. So yeah, I was also looking at this and thinking, well, there's one glitch that I'm trying to eliminate. It's the weirdest glitch of all, and it might be just a feature and not a bug, but I can't quite understand what it's doing. And I'll tell you what it is. But I'll do it as I tell you about the way that this whole thing bootstraps and how it goes. If you're not doing Visual Studio Code stuff, then you probably haven't seen this. But it's familiar to, it's similar to stuff you would see in any kind of similar situation. Where is it? Where is it? Live stream. Hello, I'm gonna live stream. Hi, everyone. I'm not gonna announce to everyone. It's like that annoys people. Hello, I'm back on Discord. How's everybody tonight? Yeah. So, persona. Just kidding. I'm self-actualized. Here we go. Always consistently myself, and that is which is to say, leave me alone. I'm cranky. So anyway, this is Python. I know a lot of people love Python. Actually, somebody mentioned in Discord on a Dev Talk channel that it's Python, and I don't know that VS Code is Python, but Platform.io is Python. But there's a lot of stuff going on under the hood in VS Code. But I can look at it. Actually, there's an open source version, of course, of VS Code, and VS Code itself is the one that Microsoft has put out is sort of like their rebranded version of an open source thing. And there are people we know who work for Microsoft, and because we're all intermingling on the GitHub. Hey, by the way, Marlin was trending like yesterday. So hey, kudos. There's the sign. There it is. So kudos to that. I'm with y'all. I'm gonna go through this whole thing. Let's just pick it up bit by bit. But I wanted to talk about what Visual Studio Code is, which kind of explains how this works, because it's kind of it's very interesting. I mean, it's an interesting environment. It's very similar to other things. Someone mentioned NetBeans or something else, but it's like you have something which is pre-built. It's a window. It has a pre-built thing to host widgets in it, and you have an editor widget, and it's kind of like the old school dream of CyberDog, so to speak. Like you have one app that is like a host to many little apps, and so it's kind of like that. VS Code is a single app, but of course it's lots of little apps inside of one big app, which is what any app is really these days, especially web apps. In the past it was like you'd have standalone widgets and they would interact with some back-end database, and they would just have, each one would have some ad hoc interface in it or whatever. And nowadays it's not much different. We just build with different tools. But within any environment, something like this, you are building with all the same stuff: JavaScript, HTML, CSS, the full stack. And you can use a certain amount of SQL somewhere in here in the background. You're generally guaranteed to have SQLite in most of these environments, or something like it. So you can do queries and store stuff in more interesting ways. I've actually been doing ridiculous queries using, loop through the structure and select the thing. Like, I'm realizing there's actually very simple ways of doing that, like something like jQuery, for example. Well, I'll get into all that as I take this apart. But the general idea is that at every level you have little apps, and every one has its own way of doing things, and then but there is one unified backend, and all the resources are sort of cobbled together. And so when you're working with this app, you're working with pretty much every tool in the underbelly of your system. So if you have a Unix system or a Linux system or something like it on Windows, then as you are running apps or doing processes inside of your code editor, you've got it set up to interact with other tools in your system. And that's what an IDE is all about, is giving you some kind of front end to deal with all your stuff. And in this case, it's the front end is ostensibly an editor, but each time you open a tab, you won't necessarily have an editor. You'll have whatever, a web app. And so that's so that's what we've got here is web apps. So as I'm pulling up here the VS Code repo, we can see how much of this is Python. Just by looking at there's actually a summary of the project itself on the page that says what the languages are. It might be insights, might give us even better insights about it. But code frequency, is that what that is? I'm learning. Nope. Additions, deletions. I'm learning. If anyone has any insights into how this all works, let me know. So let me also put my screen up for y'all on the Discordians. Hey Discordians, what's up? I'm looking at the VS Code because we were talking about it. Darn it. There was some concern about, everyone's concerned about telemetry. I don't worry about it, like nobody cares. Like the thing about anytime you're generating more data, you're actually, in a certain sense, you're undermining the man. Because you're just, like there's just too much. Like there'd never be enough spies to watch every person on the planet, because you'd basically be hiring every person on the planet. Which has been found historically to be the better way to do your spying, is to get the kids to spy on your parents, or whatever. Don't take any advice from me, history. Go the other way. So we've got all this stuff inside of VS Code. It's rather huge, but like anything, you build some little thing and you try to bootstrap it into something bigger. So in this case, this has many things, and as far as telemetry goes, there's so much you can turn on and off in the app. It's rather overwhelming sometimes. I don't know if you search for the word telemetry in the settings, you just find telemetry, but maybe you do. I don't know. We can look for that. Yeah. So, yeah, I just wanted to take a quick peek, and gosh, does it even say? It doesn't say it on the bottom of the page. It doesn't. Oh, here it is, of course. On the side of the page, it gives us this. So TypeScript, yes, 93.8% TypeScript. So actually, and they've got many contributors. So it is, if you're worried about security in a certain sense, obscurity by obscurity is one thing, but as we've learned in many situations, and I'm going to make just a little copy of this, plonk, to the clipboard and post it over here. Yeah. Hello. I have to do this. Oh, there we go. I have to tap on the page to make it work with the little pinchy gesture. Okay. So that's Visual Studio Code for you. It's using those languages. You might want to actually shrink down the window maybe, and then I can get a shot with all the stuff in the window, including the languages. No. Screw it. I'll just mansplain it. So VS Code is simply Python? Well, no. Well, comma, platform IO is Python. Specifically, scads? I want to say scads, scons. It's always funny to say scons because it's spelled S-C-O-N-S. I always want to put an E in there. But no, it's not a dry, sweet bread. dry-ish. If it's just right, well, okay, anyway. It has a buttery kind of texture, but not too buttery. Um, how much was it? Like, it's like 93.8% TypeScript. Wow, that's insane. 93.8%. Dun 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 dun. TypeScript. I know I'm not putting this up in front of you guys. I should be, but that's not the way I operate, man. No transparency. Yeah. Wow. So I'm not too worried about that. Anywho, some of the things I fixed up in ABM Alpha here, which you can see the tab says ABM Alpha, just to be more clear about it. One thing is, if you open a window that doesn't have Marlin in it now, open, like let's say I open configurations, which I think I don't have open. If I go to the Marlin tab, oops, does it even show? Oh, I have to shrink the window. Okay, there it is. Just says this: the workspace doesn't contain a valid project. Still, but it does now. It doesn't actually do any initialization. Like it doesn't notice if something in your folder changes. Like it's not looking and waiting because it has never even run. It only actually initializes and runs when it sees that you've opened a Marlin folder that has a configuration file in it, basically. So that simplifies things a bit. On a certain level, it just makes VS Code complains when you have a startup that has a star on it because they think you're doing too much. But the cool thing is that now it's like if you go and you open some other folder, like it won't show the panel, which I think it might not do anyway. I'm not sure right at the moment, but it's definitely fixed better now. So there's that. But yeah, this whole thing about making custom editors is pretty fascinating in this app. I do want to have two windows open, one with my auto build and another one. Oh, I guess I need a new window. We will open a copy of MF. Marlin Firmware, MFs, yo. So let's see what kind of theme we can find today. What's today's theme going to be? Let's go to the extension roulette and see what we find. Here we go. Theme. Yeah, so the basic things I'll be talking about today are the underpinnings of VS Code, HTML, and a little bit, which, it's the pointy thing. And we'll be talking a little about JavaScript, a lot about JavaScript, actually, and a little about Python, maybe, alluding to it, because a lot of this stuff came from Python. Winter is coming. That's a cool name. Let's try it in honor of the Game of Thrones. And we have several options which we can look at. Winter is coming. Let's choose the light one. Oh, yeah. How's that? Not bad, not bad. But, all right. If we had someone in the chat, we could ask them to throw us a word. We could say, throw me a random word, but I'm going to just pick a random animal name. Here we go. Tiger. And I think it has to be a theme. I think keyword theme, right? Tiger, really? There's a theme just called theme for late night coders. Let's try that one. That seems nice to have. Although I don't know about that font though. Flat. I don't know. I'm kind of liking the drop shadows. I think we're going to get back to We'll go with 2077. How about that? Something very purple in honor of my buddy Ian. So yeah, it's good to hear from Lou. Let's pull him up here. Oh yeah. Greetings, folks. Greetings. He's chilling tonight, as are we. Just chilling together, you and I, on a Thursday night. I don't know, everyone's probably getting geared up to wrap up the week. But for me, this is what it's all about right here. Got to get some serious things going. Wow, that is really purple. I am liking it. Okay, let's go with that. That might just be too purple. So, anyhow, yeah, I was trying to think maybe something lighter. Don't have too many. We'll go with Winter's Coming. That's all right. It's very bright. I apologize if it's blowing your eyes out, but winter is coming. Don't be fooled by all this 150-degree weather outside. Winter is coming. It's going to dump a lot of moisture on us. It's going to be crazy. Okay, what's the deal? So, as you can see, yeah, it's all functioning. So there's things that are obviously like missing. If you look at it very carefully, you'll see. First of all, it is still ginormous to look at a configuration file. I mean, this is just huge. So if I want to break it down, I need to do things. I need to hide more things, and that's the next thing that I'm working on tonight, which I may get into while we're here. But yeah, I'm going to be doing that. So this going through the code will help sort of gear that up. So let's take a quick peek. First thing I'll do is I'm going to set my editor code a little bigger, but I'm not going to set everything else bigger. Give me a 16-point font, please. There we are. Now that'll let you see what's going on. For me, it's blowing my eyes out, but it's all right. It's a lot going on. So first off, I have changed the files a bit in the last way around. So I guess I've really never given you a basic overview. So let's just do that. So here's let's start from the top. You got a bunch of files, right? The way that a VS Code plugin is organized, my friends, hello, is, let me just make sure that I have my channel set up to be able to hear things inside the live stream. It turned out I had the wrong audio input or output set the other day, and that was silly. Output device, Mac Studio speakers. Okay, good. Yeah, whatever it goes, as long as it doesn't go to the USB audio device, which is not even hooked up. I need it for the microphone. I can't. It is hooked up. I'm not about to turn that off. Okay, we're all good. So I just wanted to check that and make sure we were happy. Okay, so returning to our code. So there's some of the stuff when you go to create a new plugin or extension is done for you. So you get a little starting point, and then you can just start to fill it out. And if you read the documentation, you'll see that there are lots of things you can make an extension do. So as long as we're looking at the files, let's bring them up front and center. How's that? Sure. All right. So some of this is done for you. Gives you a README, probably proto. No, that's mine. I should probably move that because I use it in extension JS, or do I? I don't even know if I do. So the first thing that you find is probably the simplest extension can just be an extension JS file that says hello world, and that's it. But that's the first entry point for your extension. So every extension has a file called extension TS or extension JS. Well, in the end, you'll have an extension JS because if it was TypeScript, it would be compiled before it was run. It would be compiled into JavaScript, and then it would be executed as JavaScript. So a lot of what I learned was from figuring out, at least for the thing I needed to build, the example was in TypeScript, so I had to build it and get the code out and put a little of it into some of my stuff. So sometimes you find examples that are in TypeScript only, and that's the only thing you can really do is just compile them and see if you can get out the essence of what you need. Usually it makes sense, but I like TypeScript as a concept, but I just don't have time to jump into it. It's a very deep thing to grab, to get into, going from undisciplined JavaScript writing where you don't worry about types. It's like I just love to fly through my code and just the speed of thought, you know, and it slows you down, which may be good in very many situations. But for this, we're dealing with just, you know, I might mess up your text file a little bit, but you can always undo. Undo is all supported, built in, so thank goodness for that, because that's why we have undo, right? We're only human. So it'll give you, another thing it gives you is a package manifest called package.json, which basically has all these properties in it. So you'll have your name of your actual package, and so they just have a simple name, like I use lowercase and dashes. You'll have a display name, and then there's a description, and all of these things, you know, are in there to identify it, and then you basically have all these things called contribution points. So you go down to, like, well, there's all these different sections, of course. You got sponsor sections, so you can actually have somebody sponsor your extension. Badges, an area, we don't need no stinking badges, but I put some badges up there. Keywords, you've got keywords just to identify it, 3D printing, firmware, platform I/O, embedded AVR, ARM. I might add some more, STM32, build, IDE, I don't know what else. But you can just fill out the keywords with things that are relevant. They'll help people find you when they're searching, and maybe Marlin belongs in there as a keyword, but if you search for Marlin, you should find it by name. But yeah, so you identify things like what VS Code engine it was supporting at minimum, and then you've got like its repository, its homepage. So yeah, you fill out all this stuff. But there's so many things you can do. Activation events I mentioned earlier is like how you tell it where it's, you know, first what it's going to run. So actually extension doesn't have to be the name of the main. You can change it to something else, I guess. Generally speaking, you'll find most of them are just called extension, but you can be clever, I guess, and change it. But it just says workspace contains Marlin configuration. So it looks for that file inside the root of your workspace, and if it finds this file in that location, it'll assume that you have a valid Marlin folder, and it'll try to go further and identify and see if it's a valid one. And if it isn't, it'll just it'll do the sit and wait thing. So it actually does activate, but it fortunately now goes and it will wait and see. But yeah, no, not a big deal. That's sort of, you know, at that point you expect it to do something. So what I've just made is custom editors. Previously, I made a welcome view for that welcome view that you see at the beginning, and you have different states for it based on, basically each of these is like a different view based on when you have some flags set. So you got that one, when thing is initted. You might want to go more full screen here. Let's do that. You can see okay. You can see some of these things. So yeah, there's view initted, when baby I'm initted, You've got this one when it's initted and stuff. And these are just states that I can set. They're called contexts. And so you just set a context and you just give these things names and make it up yourself as you go along. So when I needed a view that would show like certain things, I can have a view, one that may be an error view or something, and stuff like that. So, and that's changes based on like whatever. You just change the context and the view changes automatically. You don't have to do anything else because the system is all handled. And there's also commands. So commands inside of VS Code are universal. Like you can send a command to any extension and it'll just obey it. Or, you know, and there may be some situation where an extension is set up to like not obey commands. So you could, there's one way you could have malicious extensions is extensions that send commands to other extensions to mess with them. But those things would get kicked out and people would be banished forever for doing that kind of thing. So don't do that kind of thing. Then anyway, you've got, so you have a command and you just, the command will show up in the command menu. So it shows up here when you do the Command Shift P thing. So if I type in here Marlin, there aren't any inside here because Marlin isn't activated for this. But over here, because I am using Marlin, shows, you can see there's build and show auto build Marlin will show. So I can have it, you know, actually show the panel, and there it just shows this actually. But yeah, so you can, so yeah, see it just shows that. It would make more sense for it to show the other view, I guess, huh? But yeah, so if you type Marlin, like all these are all the things. Focus on Marlin info view, which actually isn't even a thing right now. Focus on build view, and this one, that one should definitely show the other ones. This one does like, that does the build view. That's what that should do. But yeah, I'm gonna have to fix that. But basically, yeah, you have commands that show up in the menu. So that's what you contribute there. And it's all just done by this. So if you're just screwing around, you wanna make things like little tools to like help yourself while you're doing editing. You can whip up one of these little extensions, make up commands for yourself, and then just, you know, they're just JavaScript, and they give you, from that point you get, you know, hooks into the editor, you get hooks into your own stuff, whatever's in your package, of course. You can do whatever you like with that. So yeah, so you've got this one, ABM upload is the name of the command. So to give you an idea, this one is called, it's got a category, so it's in this category that shows up in the menu, and you saw that shows up here as the thing before the colon, and that just makes it easier for them to be grouped. Then the command itself has a simple name that you can look for or use for sending commands. And so again, if anything sends a command from another plugin or whatever to extension, got used to that, the wording. This is the command that will be executed, and it'll actually, so you can have, if you wanted to write an extension that worked with AutoBuild Marlin to make it better, rather than contributing to AutoBuild Marlin itself, you could just have it call this upload, and AutoBuild would do its best to try and run upload on your target, your current target. So then you have a title, and the title of course shows up next to the category, and the icon, and so you can have an icon, and those icons are used over in this like toolbar up here. I'll show you this up here. These little icons are specified there, and these are just SVG, so they scale well. They'll scale to any size pretty much. So that's pretty cool. Yeah, so it gives you all these hooks into the interface itself, which are, you know, you just have to kind of dig through the docs and find all the things you need. Or the examples are very helpful. Like you can steal a lot from the examples. Bootstrapping this, I used cat, the cat editor thing, cat coding, the cat coding example. And that was my starting point. I compiled it out into JavaScript and looked at that. And that gave me a good starting point, and I cleaned it up a bit. And it was a bit confusing at first, which is why I'm going to go over the bootstrap process of dealing with the extension itself, because that was the most annoying part. So yeah, and then you can see another contribution point here, menus. So commands, menus. So menus show up, let's see, where do they show up? In this case, these particular ones, view/title, the contributed views title menu shows up just in the title bar of the view that is being supplied, and I don't know exactly how it chooses which view, whether it, oh, it has to do with it's in either view, but what it does is it looks at the current when, and it looks at view equals whatever. So you can actually identify the view in real time. So you make all these things to appear in all your sidebar views or whatever, these little suckers, these little views over here. And whatever you make will show up in either, depending on the conditions, including what view it is. And you just, so you're kind of writing a bit of code inside the JSON file itself. As you can see, those conditions are basically code. When this, is true, of course, eval is something that JavaScript can do. So, and I'm actually using that in the plugin. It's safe. I'm not evaling values that you type in. Just evaling conditions that the code is creating. So, and it's doing it in a very clever way where it's searching and replacing. You'd have to be a really good hacker to figure out how to hack into this thing at all. I wouldn't even know where to begin. It's totally weird. I guess I could see ways that you could hack in. That I could make it hack, but I could proof it. I could make it hack proof. I know I could. Just strip all the weird characters out and you're good. Anyway, so you set up dev dependencies, extension dependencies. In this case, I specifically, if you know the identifier of another extension, you can specify that extension as a dependency, and it will automatically be recommended when you install your extension, or not just recommended. I don't know if you have to, but when you try to use the auto build, it will say, I can't do anything because there's no platform IO. So it may continue to bother you until you do, which is why you have one without the other. So anyway, that's the essence of that, and you just specify the things, and it's that simple really. You just have to name the things. The most interesting part is just the contributes area. So in the case of custom editors, this may be one of the cooler parts. I set it up as here we are. Get this out of the way. Hold on. So yeah, this says 16 too big. Config editor is the name that I gave the view type. So I use camel case. I'm being weird. Display name config editor. I might call it something else. It doesn't show. It shows up somewhere. I forget where. Oh, it shows up in here. When you right-click on the tab, it gives you an option to reopen the editor with config editor, auto build Marlin, merge editor, or text editor. So, and you can configure a default editor for H, and you can decide I want it to be this one, please, or that one. So that's one of the things I put in, is that little thingy, that little widget will now appear. So if you don't like using the config editor, you can say I'm going to use the text editor, or you can reopen it with the config editor, but when you close it and then subsequently reopen it, it should, if all goes well, reopen with the text editor. Yep. So yeah, you can totally change that configure please to the config editor please. So that's pretty cool. The other thing that's cool is this center layout. You can't tell because it's too large right now, but there's a cool center layout in this thing. There we go. that. Pretty neat. Yeah, I like the centered layout, so we're gonna stick with that mostly. So yeah, and so the only other thing is you just have to set a file name pattern. So it's like, what files will it work for? And I was kind of surprised that it was this simple. I didn't realize I'd be able to just specify a file name. I thought it would be more like you had this MIME type, or I don't know what the selector would be. So yeah, that was a lucky break. Oh, that the default option. What? I think the selector is fine. Last time I checked, it was fine. That's weird. Valid values, default and option. That's strange. Is this new? It's weird because it actually did specifically say selector was one of the things I could do. But what version of this? This is from 1 week ago. So seems new enough, but this is the August release. There is actually, I noticed there was a little badge for an update. Let's do the update. What the heck? It's quick enough. We'll come back to this. So now you've seen the basics of the JSON file, which, you know, very typical of this type of thing. You would have a manifest. Same with library files or whatever. So we'll open up Marlin first here. And it's taking a second to load. It's being slow. Oh, I seem to remember when I got an update before, it did the same thing. It had this weird behavior of not working. Let's try, oh, yeah, it's gone. It's just gone. So I don't know what's, oh, you know what it was? I remember what it was. It's not that it's just gone. I have to run it special. I have to run it special ABM code so that it gets the plugin from the right place. There's a whole plugin thing. So if you run it in the right way, you get what you want. What you want, and that's what I want. So one of the things that'll happen is this will all get indented, which will look nicer. The other thing that hopefully will happen is I'll get to this, the whole point here, which was to look at the startup process. So here's how an extension goes on your VS Code. And this conveniently wraps around my head, so that'll work out well. So your extension.js runs first, and so you bring in your stuff, whatever it might be. In this case, I didn't need Proto, but Proto actually doesn't need to run here. Let's see, what else? Yeah. So first thing you do is you can get your VS Code, which you need to do all the things you're going to do. So at minimum, you're going to need that. In this case, I actually am bringing in a few of my things, and then using them, a few of my own classes. And then this thing called Proto, which just modifies the string class in a typical way. It extends string. So this is just a thing that we do. And it calls init on itself to extend the string class. So it changes it basically adds, this one of the great things about JavaScript is you can extend the language itself and extend types in your app. So that's what that does. You can take a closer look at that if you're interested in that sort of thing. The next thing that extension.js does, after importing all that stuff, is it makes a little reference to VS Code commands for our convenience, or I do, for my convenience. The next thing you have is you have to declare exports activate, and this is all JavaScript. So if you're into TypeScript, you're not going to get much out of this, or maybe you will. But you can translate to TypeScript, or a lot of examples are in TypeScript, so you'll find plenty of those that do this in a slightly different way, but equivalent way. So I get a CS for context subscriptions, again, another shortcut just so I don't have to type as much, and it makes it a little neater. Sure, it doesn't slow anything down, who knows? Probably makes the compiler faster, who knows? But anyway, being all token based and everything. So you must do it this way, basically. This is the incantation you must do to register commands that you talked about in your anything you declared in your JSON file. This is where you're going to hook them up. So you hook them up so that this command will run this function, this handler, and that's pretty much that. So these are all just hooked up to my ABM class, or should say module, with these commands, with run command, which is my internal thing that I made to do the build, upload, traceback, clean, config, etc. And then maybe sponsor. So those are the commands, and then this is where the custom editor provider comes in right here. That's pretty much it. That's all I had to do for that as far as initialization. Once you've done this, it becomes automatically hooked up for opening those types of files and displaying that editor. Next I init and do all the things that I need to do for my ABM class. So I could really call one thing in ABM and do all of this. I could considerably do the same thing here as well if I wanted. I could, instead of calling these here, I could have this be part of ABM and package it in there. It's just kind of nice in a way to have all your initial hookup that relates to the JSON file be in here. Just makes more sense. So at the end, you've got, I think, do a thing where I'm like, do I show on startup? If so, then I set timeout and I have the ABM opens up the panel. So run command is what opens up the panel as it happens. With no command, it just does that. Opens. By default, open. And it gives it a 1-second timeout because I was confused. I could just call it directly probably right here. But I was confused about like platform IO opening up. It may be that it was opening and getting in the way, like it was in the wrong order. Like it would open in front, and so I would have to switch back. So it's possible that just by doing a longer timeout, I was avoiding that. That's possible what was going on. So anyway, it's still there as a thing, but it doesn't seem to make any big difference. And it's kind of a nice thing. It's almost like an asynchronous thing. It allows the other stuff, whatever initialization needs to finish before it goes and says, okay, let's set up this whole new web view. So for at least 1 second anyway. So then the last thing you have to add is like, what are you going to do when you deactivate? And by default, I just set the active context to false. So that's basically how that works. And then there's a whole context thing which happens like, oh, right here, I set context to true. So I have my own little set context method, but it's doing VS Code stuff. Tell VS Code, to call that, and it puts ABM dot on the front, and so it's easily related and basically just makes it easier for me to set statuses without sticking ABM dot on the front of everything. Oh well. But that's the entire setup for this not so complex extension that has all these, it has sidebar views that pretty much do their own thing. I'm going to set up a tree view at some point, so that'll be another thing that you can do. It's another thing you can contribute as a contributor. So that's the entirety of extension.js. We don't really need to look at that anymore. So what happens when you, so in here I've got my resources, got my images, but ABM is where I put all the important stuff. So the abm.js, so it is where it runs that run command. So let's take a quickie look at what happens there, just so we get an idea of what happens at startup. I think it's in here. Or did I call it run underscore command? Yeah, I did, of course. Oh, one of the things, of course, if you're working in this sort of stuff, To make something into a module, all you do is at the end you say module.exports, and you name all the functions that you want to be seen by stuff outside of your module when they require it, and with one of these require statements. Pretty simple. Under the hood, it turns this into something modular with dot notation that you can call stuff. So it looks kind of like a class or a namespace or something like that, but it's all done with everything at the root, so to speak. So it's not as indenty. Anyway, this is rather long, as you can see, going behind my head. We've got about 800 lines, but I'm not going to go through them. No, no, no. I'm just going to find run command, and then we're going to look at and see what that does for us. So this is the whole initial setup actually happens right here. It knows, for example, that it'll check to see if the panel has been set up yet, and this is where it sets it up. So it'll just reveal it in the case of already being set up and run the selected action. Otherwise, you create a panel. So these are, the internals. You create a panel, and you have to pass a few things, which is just your, basically the name of the panel that you described in your JSON file, whatever title is going to be. In my case, this is usually called Auto Build Marlin, but we'll just call it ABM Alpha while it's an alpha. And then you say how you want it to lay out, and then usually you just say view column 1. I forget if there's a special way I forget what it means when you say view column 2. Maybe it opens up to the right of your editor or something like that. I'll have to look into it, but for the moment, when you're doing a simple panel like this, one simple pane, it's just view column 1. So that's what that is. And then who knows, maybe it does open up multiple panels. That would make things pretty simple. You could say view row 3 or whatever. But you then, you can say things like, can the view accept commands? So actually, yeah, you have that kind of stuff. And how does it get commands? Well, the way that commands work is through a sort of a broadcaster-listener kind of situation, so things register for them, as we just did in the initialization, which you just saw. The incantation, which I didn't describe in great detail, but essentially setting up the command to call the thing. So it's hooked in now. Doing the plugins here is really straightforward, I have to say. So you specify a few things. One of the important one is local resource roots, and you have to specify what folder you're going to allow things to be included from, and I basically just said the whole thing. Everything outside, in the parent of this folder can be imported within this thing. So if I specify an image to load inside of a web page that I want to display inside of a panel, then it has to be authorized at that point. So pretty simple. So then I create a little shortcut, PV, to refer to my panel web view. It's up in the top. Global, to make it global. And then, a few other things happen here, but that's the whole of that. So when you set up the web view, you then have to get some web view content from somewhere. I have a function to return the starting HTML. That's traditional, and you'll see that also in the other one, in the editors itself. The custom editor itself is also, again, big old web form, so you just have to set it up in a web view. And try to keep it simple, so it lays out quick and fast and is easy to set up. Although things are so fast these days, it's crazy. But anyhow, you then set up how to dispose it and all the things that should go away when someone closes it. So if you had it, so all kinds of things go with it. Like when you have it open, it wants to keep the view refreshed. So I have it watching folders, validating files in case you do a typo that makes the file completely screwed up. It can catch that and show you an error. Hopefully I'll catch that better. Like now that I have this parser in there, I could use that to catch errors and use it as a way of linting the file to make sure it's not broken. And then you have the set context. So at the end, like it says, no, I'm not visible anymore. So it actually knows it's basically, that's to tell all the things that care about the context whether or not the panel is visible, and then their logic will automatically respond to it. I don't know how, I guess there's a cycle that probably checks those conditions every so often. I'm not sure how it works under the hood, but pretty cool that you can do that and that everything responds without having to do anything. It's not even sending a message, so to speak. I mean, you're setting a context, which is like sending a message, but it's just the state of, it's actually a set of states. So it's basically you set a bunch of states, and then anything can check those states. Something you can learn from for like app design generally is always have pools, messaging pools and things like that. They can work really well. I shouldn't speak too much about that, being that I can't do so much of that in Marlin right now. Although there's, the possibility to supplant things as you get to, bigger and better boards and other platforms. You can make them bigger and better, but it is what it is. Always is what it is. I come back to that. It's like we must accept where we are. I could have created a new firmware from scratch, but here we are. So on did change view state. So yeah, this is the kind of thing like you check for. Let's see, was this if panel active, post some messages? Yeah, so this is basically if you hide and reshow the panel, it knows it needs to update its whatever widgets are in it and stuff. I believe is what's going on. Update show checks boxes when shown. Oh, and auto revealed too. There's another one. Handle messages from the window. So that's how this all works. Is there's inter messaging, and so anytime you want to send and receive messages, you simply say who's going to receive the message, who's the listener for messages, and in this case I've specified just this thing, and then my own CS, which is my context subscriptions. So that comes up a lot, context subscriptions. All the things like your commands and your messaging and stuff comes through the context subscriptions stuff. So it makes sense. You're subscribing to some service to send and receive messages. And then, so it does what it does, and as you can imagine, it's just a big switch statement with what did the commands say, and then you just do what you're going to do with the data that it includes, and it's just a bloody little dictionary blob, as we call them. I guess now everything, even in JavaScript, we call them dictionaries now, which is good. I don't remember what we used to call them. Objects, just objects, objects within objects, or objects with properties. So the other cool thing was the IPC file, which is just, of course, you want to be able to watch, have some activity somewhere else, trigger an event in your app. One good way to do that is to use what's called an IPC file, or that's what I called it anyway. I create a file called IPC, and then I set a watcher on it, and basically anytime that some external process, in this case, when I start platform IO, it has no clue, at least when I start the build, it has no clue about the existence of what started it. It just is in an environment, and it and it has no automatic behavior where it can send a message that I finished the build. And the terminal that it's running in might be able to have something like a busy state that I can check. That might be something to look at. But without that, it's just like you don't know when the build is finished or not finished. And so the IPC file is how I do that. I just change the contents of this file, or write to the file, changing the date and time on it, or even just touch the file with touch, and that automatically triggers the IPC watcher, and that takes care of sending that basically sends a message to your app. So that's pretty clever stuff. You can watch anything within your purview of like whatever has been authorized. So within the folder that I'm watching, it's totally authorized to do that. I wouldn't be able to do it if I tried it like somewhere outside in the weird wild world. So yeah, what do you do on dispose? You get rid of that. So okay, all that kind of stuff is happening, and Finally, the very last thing it does is sets the context visible to be true, which is, the opposite of what it does on dispose. Fairly simple, very straightforward. Jump in anytime to Visual Studio Code plugins, because this is kind of, fairly straightforward. You have this one thing called get nonce, which you'll see a lot, probably in other places too, which just creates a random string that you can use as a unique identifier for your process. And as long as you use the same thing within one process to say, okay, this is my little authorizer string, and the other thing knows it's a very simple way to give them like a pass key to each other, but certainly not by no means like super secure, but it's good for very casual within a simple controlled environment situation. So all of these things, they're named, but they're not actually called, which is why they're dimmed out here inside this thing. So that's all the initialization you need for that. So then the next bit is, what if someone opens up an editor? What happens then? And you'll remember that we had a moment ago that we have this thing called a config editor provider, and there's a file that gets editor dot requires a /editor. So extension includes the editor.js so that it can just so it can set this up, but then it's sort of hanging out there, and it doesn't get invoked until the config editor provider takes care of it. So here it is, of course. How does it find that file? It doesn't have to be called editor. You can call it whatever you want. And it's by virtue of the context. I think I might have named it in the, did I mention it in the JSON file? No, I'm forgetting. Editor.js. Where is it mentioned? I forget. Yeah, it's kind of weird. I'm forgetting how does it remember that it's the editor.js file? I think it must have to do with the fact that because it's included here, what it's doing is, oh, I get it, yeah. This is part of the VS Code magic, is that this file here is sort of persistent, and anything in its scope is also persists for as long as it persists. And so that's what's happening here. This thing gets loaded when your initialization happens, whenever that is, whatever condition you set. And so it just happens then, and then this persists from that point forward. And so it has registered this file, but it's also holding on to everything in this file that it needed. It has a reference to this whole class, so to speak, and by having that reference, it keeps it alive within that particular universe, and so it can pass those references around within the app itself, so to speak. Because of these things are required, they're all in touch with each other, and as long as they're in touch, they share a universe. So make of that what you will. So your editor thing is at the least you have to have your config editor provider class, and generally speaking it works by, you call a register thing, and then it just basically, you create a provider, and then you say return from this register context the results of this register custom editor provider with this, my view type, whatever that is, and my provider. View type, by the way, is set before this runs even, because it's outside here. It gets set by this here as a static member of the class. Um, it doesn't show up in the class, like there's no reference to it, but because it's been created, this finds it. So a little weird, but that's how that works. And I'm not sure where, I don't think it needs to, I guess you have to have declared the class before you can declare the thing below it and set the value and stuff, because you can put properties on anything, of course, in JavaScript, so you have that going for it. And I have this going for me. So sorry I'm rushing, but I know usually I go very long, and I have a lot to get through, so I'm an hour in here, which isn't terrible. We've had some good hangout time, right? Okay, so when the editor is, so there's some stuff that happens, and then you have something called resolve custom text editor, and that is automatically, and it's an async thing, and so this is where I get a little lost. I haven't worked with async functions much yet, but I know that async functions are really cool because you can have promises and wait, and it's all now built into the language, and it's better than doing it the old way, which you had to have promise chains. And I'm going to learn. I'm going to figure this all out. I'm learning as I go. I had just learned what a promise chain is just the other day, which I can't believe. I've been out of the web development thing so long that I missed that neat idea somewhere along the way. It's neat, not super, original. It's just neat. But there's so many weird things about JavaScript. Its scopiness and the way it holds on to things, and especially scopes, and when this means this and what it means. Yeah, it's very strange. But you get used to it. So now that they have real classes, that's a thing. I'm gonna have to start using them. But yeah, so when you the only thing I've done with this is, let's see, resolve custom text editor. So that gets called automatically, and you can do whatever you want. It lives here, so I create a document, and I actually store it on the VW, the VS Code window object, because it's there, basically. Not to be confused with WV, which stands for my web view. I might have to fix that, just because of all the letters to interpose, VW and WV. Do you mean WW or VV? Double V? W? What? So we have the web view panel. So I might just call it WP because that's much clearer. But yeah, so again, this is standard setup of how you have to do a custom text editor. You don't have to save the document anywhere. You can just ignore that, and it'll show up when it needs to be available. I guess because the document is passed here, and again, as long as this stuff is exists, when they refer to document, they get whatever was sent to this at the time that it was resolved. So so it's a little on the weird side, the way that some of these things, again, JavaScript works, but it's holding on to document for its lifetime, which is the lifetime of the app, or the lifetime of the view. What's interesting about this is that this editor.js file is, as I mentioned, it only opens when you open up that file. Again, it's not the thing where it's being very conservative, only launches when it needs to, and then goes away when it's no longer needed to free up the memory, which is good. It'll keep things lean, hopefully. And keeping the JavaScript fast hopefully helps keep things lean too. So you got your standard setup here is this stuff. You got you create your web view panel, which is passed as an argument, web view, and that gives you just an access to the view itself, and then you can start filling it in. So you don't even need to create it. That's the really cool thing. It's just passed on to you. Unlike in the other case where you saw we had to actually create it, Here it's passed to us and we just fill in the options and fill in the HTML. And in this case, you have to use this to refer to the thing or it wouldn't know where to find it. It's within, this class, I guess. It's part of within config editor provider is where it is. So it hasn't been declared, it's down here, so it can actually refer to things that are declared later, which is always nice in a language. So what else happens here? So this gets the web view. Oh, that's update web view. See, I was confused for a second. Down here is where get web view happens. So this is actually, it's a little weird in that when you look at this, like you don't realize these are functions because there's no function keyword on the front of them. There are, there's one on this, or there's none on this, it's just async, but within it, I'm declaring a couple functions. And then outside here, it's back to, oh, these aren't functions, these are, well, they are, but they're declared without the function. I almost want it to be there just because, oh, they're methods. Okay, because it's class, they're methods. You don't declare a function for a method. Okay, fine, I get it, but why not something? I don't know, I guess with TypeScript you'd be doing a lot more C-like stuff. Anyway, this returns, you're given a web view, and so you can refer to it, which you might need to. In this case, so I can set up the whole links that work. So you get and all you're going to return is a big blob of HTML. And what's curious about this is that the HTML, whatever you do in this function, of course, up to the return part, is running in the context of this script, this class. But anything in this HTML here, the stuff that gets generated out of it, all is going to run in the context of the web view that you're creating. So if you have any JavaScript in here that's inside of, the head, whatever, or even included any of this JavaScript, all of this JavaScript is going to have access to everything that the web view has access to, but nothing else. So it's a little weird. You can't just include something here necessarily in your head script necessarily, but you may be able to. Like in the other web view that I have which I guess I just call web view now. I'm going to have to change their names, give them better names, but we won't look at the pains. They're a pain. I don't think I'll even be using them in the future. But yeah, we called it, let's see, gosh, I'm like looking right at it and I'm not seeing it. Marlin editor, ABM, well, I guess we can look at ABM HTML. So you can see this file is actually read and then turned into returned as a string and basically interpreted as a string inside of backtick quotes. And so everything that's inside this file, like these little $ things, are getting actually filled in and replaced with strings. And so these bits, anything that's inside of these comes from the context of the file that's including this, which is, I think, abm.js. But then once this file is then in situ, it's going to be this JavaScript down here is going to only have access to whatever the web view has access to. And so you can acquire VS Code API in the web view and then use it, as we pointed out before. But, then you can't get access to everything that, like you can't say VS Code. You might be able to say VS Code.workspace, but the things you dot off of this particular VS Code API aren't necessarily going to be connected in the way that you hope. So you get some limits, and that's why the message passing is important. Anything that you need done on one side, like in your view, if you need access to some data that the view itself is like sort of a little bit sandboxed off, then you have to rely on message passing to get it, or request, basically. So you're sending a message to request information if that's the way it's going to work, and then you'll get another message back that sends the information as a reply. And so you need to be able to respond to that. And so, you set up your own little protocol, whatever it's going to be. But it's fairly straightforward. Sending little objects with properties just works great. And you can send them across all these lines. But you'll notice that if you alter like what you get inside of your message, and you try to like change like something you think is a reference, it's apparently a copy. So you don't get the original reference to things. So that's why the message passing again is important. It's still they're somewhat sandboxed off from each other because each one is in its own little bubble. But they have these tenuous connections. In this case, this HTML file is really a template file. I could call it a .tpl file or something, but it is, the whole body of this becomes the starting point for what gets filled in. So you just set up all your identifiers as you would in any kind of web interface, and then you fill them in. So yeah, remembering the difference between the contexts, or the scopes, and what you have access to is a little tricky, but you get used to it. It's just one of the facts of the way that plugins, at least WebView plugins, work inside of this this Appy universe. So I was looking for where that got torn down or built up or whatever, but we don't need to look at that. Marlin.js, I can put that away for now. So before we get to edit view, which is the actual edit view, we'll just take a quick look again back at this process of setting it up. So web view panel, web view, set it up, update web view, we have a function. Update web view is going to be called in response to a message that we get about the document being changed externally. So this is a handler. I could call it something like handle document change, something like that, but it would refer to external document change. Although I noticed that you do get local edit messages as well. In fact, actually, that's what this sends all messages. Like if you made the change from within your plugin or not, it can't tell the difference. It can't tell the difference even when it's the thing doing the change. This file makes the change. The message still gets generated by the underlying system because you're subscribed to a message that, again, is kind of dumb about where the edit's coming from. It doesn't care. So it'll send you the message in any case. And the whole point is to get you to, you need to refresh your view because the document changed, which makes perfect sense. I have tried to hack it, and I pointed this out in my stream. This is one of the points where I'm struggling. I was going to mention it, and I'm here. We made it. But yes, this is one of the weird bits where, because of the way the messaging passing works and the amount of information you can keep and so forth, I had to do all these little hacks basically to keep the, well, I don't know if they expect you to have the view remain like scrolled in play, like where it was when an edit is made. Like I did notice that when I made external changes, it didn't scroll, it kept it in place. But it depended on how I dealt with the message. Like you do have to rebuild the form. You have to rebuild the entire page when you get like the text. You kind of have no other choice because you don't know what changed. If you were to go and scrape the text and look for the change, you'd probably waste more time than just saying, okay, fine, rebuild. So we just rebuild. And you'll find every error or typo or whatever that way, and I suppose that helps. And I can use the header to put up messages about typos or errors or problems in your code or in your config. That's one of the things I hope to do is like catch errors early with the sanity checks, like use those. But we'll get into that. That's going to be another coding session unto itself. Like that's almost AI-like, man. Not so much, but we're going to have to like look at like if you have a certain option, like is there a message for it, and like present that message as maybe just a little bubble, and you can check it and see if it's right or not. I can probably put a little disclaimer, might be wrong, but check this message. There's a sanity check mentioning your thing. or at least enough about it that we should check. And the sanity checks are a little weird, so I don't know, I'll have to check and see if that's worthwhile. I could just do something like there are these messages in sanity check and there are these other messages in warnings, and just give you a little list that you can like review and decide yourself whether it matters. That would be kind of cool. So again, it's like, I mean, how much do I want to go into this user experience with regard to editing a couple of text files? Well, apparently a lot, because I'm investing a lot of time learning this VS Code stuff. But the internals of VS Code and writing extensions are, I think they're worthwhile for any like webby developer to know, because it's a cool environment, and being able to like write stuff that can interact with the back end. I think that, you know, of any setup that you have, I think that's pretty cool. I think that's going to make for a lot of fun. So anyway, I'll try to make more eye contact with you even as I type. I don't think I can. I need to look. I need to look at this. Sorry. You know what I should do is get one of those things with the mirror, like the two-way mirror. I'm looking through the glass at the screen, but it looks like I'm looking straight at you. Like, who's the Errol Morrison? You like Errol Morris? Sorry, Morrison. Just like Errol Morris, right? Okay. And here we go. So you're probably way ahead of me already. If you've read ahead, you already know that the next thing is that we have another handler for another message that, well, we have a handler? No, that's something that we're going to use. Something else we're going to use inside this context, but this one actually is not a handler. This is a thing that we're going to call to send a message off to the web view. And the way this works is there's a queue somewhere stuck on a global object or a global-ish object, and it hangs around until something looks for it and picks it up. Everybody gets a chance to look at it in the next loop, or whatever that is. So here we have the web view. In this case, I have this hacky flag local edit, which I'll talk about a little more, but that's related to the fact that every time you just have to rebuild the form every time you get text, and you can't tell whether it's a local edit or not. So you have to decide what to do if you know, quote unquote, know it's a local edit. Like, I don't expect an external edit to happen at exactly the same time as you press save, or on a local edit, or do a change on a local edit. And I think you get a different interface if the file changes when you have changes on your file anyway, although I may have to deal with that. If the file is changed, like put up a message saying, hey, do you want to load the one that was, you know, changed, or do you want to keep the one that you're working on? That's basically how that works. But so I set a flag called local edit, and that's what I use to say, okay, well, anytime I do an edit, I'll send a message to say, ignore this edit, please. Don't reload the form when you get that alert that it should be reloaded with all that text. Just pretend it never happened. So that's what I do, is I check the local edit, and I don't update the stuff if that's the case. So, good idea, bad idea? Well, it turns out it breaks being able to split the view. If you try to split the view and you do an update in one window, it used to be you would update both, but now it's like it doesn't. So if I can get it to do the update without changing, the one thing it's doing is it's like throwing off the scroll. That's all it's really doing. It's like suddenly you're at the top. And there's also an issue where even with this hack, it like still, the flag somehow isn't set on the first time you do a change, which is really weird. Like it's like it doesn't get the message or something that it's supposed to send. Like maybe I need to send it twice or something. I'm not sure. It may be that the message is sent, but it's because it doesn't get it soon enough. It gets the edit first, but the message doesn't have. I don't know. The thing is that the message has to have gotten there first, because the edit itself is a message, so it has to have gotten there first. So again, I've been over it a couple hundred times and tried a few different combinations of different things and hacked a different thing. It just, yeah. So as closest I've gotten, the one thing it does is it makes the form more responsive. It doesn't have to reload for every change, which is really nice. Uh, and there's a difference between getting a document changed from the file having changed externally and there being out of sync, yeah, versus a document change which only changes the data. So I'm like, well, if you're only changing the data, what's the big deal? Just let it stand, and I don't need this message. What's the point? But yeah, if those were to come right at the same time, it would screw things up. But it should be extremely, extremely, extremely rare. And also you don't need to split the view. There's no need to split the view. I mean, there may be sometimes I could see for comparison, but having them both be in perfect sync with each other, I don't know. I mean, they do have to be. So one thing I could probably do is maybe I can send a message that tells the other view to reload, like from the data. Because they both have the same data, don't they? Oh, I have to look into that. When you have split view, how do they manage their data copies? Do they get out of sync? Ooh, well, we'll find out. It's just a curious thing because you don't need to split them, but I mean, I can see why you might, and that could cause problems if you did it a lot. Like so many things in life. So we get rid of the listener when our editor is closed. Unusual thing. You have to set up a non-dispose method. In this case, we call the change document subscription and we dispose of it. Or we use, the one we made here. So you can see it's actually like, there's a mixture here of like declaring a function, running a bit of code here where it creates this document subscription and prepares it to do this bit of code. So there's that thing about the custom editors. That message was helpful because I tried it out and I was like, oh, but I don't want it to scroll. I don't want to have to rebuild the form. But yeah, if you had 10 of them open, you could imagine like 10 times rebuilding the form. I mean, if I can send the data, that's the best. That may be the way to go because, I don't know, I have an option where it can, this is the cool thing, is like the only reason that the state exists is so you can switch the tab away and then come back while without having fully closed the document. And, at that point, it would normally say, it sends you the whole text. It would normally send you the whole text, but in that case, it gives you that one exception. And I'm like, well, you gave me the exception, so can I get an exception to the messages from my own edits? Like, that would be nice. I mean, I could turn off the notification, possibly, on did change text document. Like, maybe there's a way to only look at the external changes and not worry about the internal ones. There's a way to just tell here. That would be nice. I'll have to look at that closer. So that was one minor thing. So anyway, this whole thing is built up to do stuff. So none of this is actually being activated much yet. So, but it will be. So we have a little message handler for the messages that we want to get from the web view, and there aren't many. I have one so I can get the filter and include it in the state, or not in the state, but I can save them in the prefs. That's one of the things I can't get access to from the web view is just preferences. You can't like just do a require statement inside the web view again. So you can't just get any of your scripts that has all this stuff in it. So I figured message, it's fine. That's what messages are for. And also it keeps the web view side cleaner anyway. It doesn't have to worry about the details. It just sends the message. That's really what it's about, right? Keep it simple. It's all about simplicity and oil. So then you got ignore. Don't reply with a full text on the next edit. There it is. So I have a message to tell it to ignore, which can be sent from the editor. But normally, this is also set just by like, anytime I get a change, I'll automatically set that flag. So That's what it does here. Update the config option, no problem. And so it actually just sends the data, which is just the changed option. Here you go. And then whatever changes are there, it'll just apply them to the text. And in this case, I think, yeah, it just includes the change. So you can have things like toggle become enabled or disabled, and you can have a value change, and that's about it. And then you got a little hello message just so I can have information message here for later use. I always forget the name. Show information message. Why not just hello? Just call it hello. Info hello. So anyway, the next thing is you set up an on did receive message, which will, you know, again, you connect your web view to a thing, so it will know to receive this message. Like, you could potentially, like, maybe have the web view itself call its own on did receive message and have it do this, but this is here to be in this context for a reason, so it can have access to all that stuff. So yeah, but you have access to the web view, so you can control it, but it can't control you, which makes it a client and you're a server, I guess, or maybe it's the other way around. Depends on your view of service. Tell the web view about the saved filter text on the first open. You got your init filter thing. Tell the web view about the saved filter text on first open. Yep. So that's all that does, is it just sends whatever we have in our preferences off to the web view, and hopefully it gets them. Now the reason that, of course, is this is being constructed for the first time, so when you see this go away, if I have, like, say I put in heater, and then I close this, you'll see it's happy to let me close it, but look, now it's got heater, it's still there. So it keeps the thing. I used the storage, the preferences storage, settings storage, because that was the most convenient one at hand that I knew about, but there is something else that I can use apparently called a memento or something like that. So I think I'll just use that to store what I need persistently for the session, and then we can throw it away. I was looking for a way to do settings, like was there something in the settings API that just pertain to the window that you're, just pertains to the edit session that you're in from somewhere, but they kind of doesn't make sense because you're an edit provider. An edit provider is kind of like, I don't know if it's running, I guess I could check that out and see. One of the things I wanted to see about the initialization was, where is it running, like how often does it run the provider bit? And I think it actually only does run this the once, because every time it refers to a document, it's referring to a different document. So there'll be more than one of these alive at any given time. So yeah, I don't even need to look at it, I know. There are more than one of these alive at any given time. So you just have to live with that, man. So yeah, the last thing it does after sending the filter off to the view, so it has access to it, is to actually display the configuration header file contents, update web view. So let's take a look at that. That's actually up here. And what does that do? Well, it sends a message, hey, update. So it actually just sends an update message to update the view. So that's the last thing it does. If I left this off, it would not update the view. At least not every time. I'm trying to remember if again, this is the thing with the config editor provider. We'll just make a note here. When does this run? Let's take a quick console log. And we'll see that it I'm using Copilot and it knows what I want, so it's getting to know this app really well. So if I open this up, you'll see a lot of messages, but one of them is rebuild config form with text. Oh, I gotta reload. When I change that file, I have to reload editor.js. So now it should be gone completely. So here we have got a message, what? The provider is still there. check it out. If we reload the window, let's check it out. We'll see what we got. So this is interesting because I think the provider file itself, yeah, the provider file itself only loads the once, but the other part loads multiple times. So it's good to get a little insight here. Let's go back to the other window. But yeah, this is the part that changes each time. Is it wants to get a different, each one's going to get, I guess you could say, bound to a different document and web view panel. So this is the for example, again, we have to reload when we, oops, I keep forgetting the button is right there, right next to the platform IO. So this time it said, what was the message we put up? Resolve, we can look for that. Oop, or we can't. Oh, we haven't opened it yet. That explains that. So you'll notice that, but provider, I should say, provider. So the thing loaded, config provider JS loaded, but now, boom, none of those. Oops. Now I only get resolve custom text editor. There it is. So it resolves one, and now if I open the other one, it resolves it again. And now if I close this and reopen it, it must resolve it once again, and of course rebuild the config form with text. But yeah, it's preserving that pretty well. The one place that it falls down is just switching tabs. So if I put in heater here, and then I switch tabs, and I return, it's gone. So where did it go? It went to heaven? I don't know. But if I open the other file, it reappears in that file. And of course, if I reopen this file, you have to double click to actually open a file. Just clicking on it once is previewing the file. But it treats it the same way until you start editing. So that's pretty neat. But yeah, and then now it's back. Now it's working. But yeah, why? I don't remember. Like, once it's established, it sort of sticks around. But like if I change this now to heats, none found, right? I come back here, it's heater. It's still heater over here. So, and it's heater over here. So what I will do is actually I'll probably tie it to each document. But the thing is, like, yeah, I'm saving it in the preferences is like, or settings. It's a little iffy because it's like it's not getting it exactly what I want. But the thing is, like, it switches back. So I think the trick is that it calls resolve custom text editor every time. So this would be the place to, well, I should say it calls register on resolve custom text editor. How does this work exactly? Oh, no, this is right. This is what gets called when the custom editor is open. It even says right here. It says also, yeah, so the register part, that's kind of the part I wanted to check out. How often does that get called? Right. So let's check that out. Reload. So these are tiny details, but they important. All right, so provider. So we did get loaded and we did get register. So even though, again, it's because our plugin is loaded, isn't it? Like if I look at the same stuff over here, you won't, even though I'm using the same version of Marlin, it won't have any of that because it hasn't loaded. So conveniently, it registers because it is loaded. It's been registered because it found a config file, and it's ready to go. So it's all tied to those configs, man. So next you have, I may just make Marlin /configuration star.h and see if that works, because I figure you could probably make your own and start dividing them up if you feel like it. Even though, and you know, I'd even say like, I could make tools in here to do things like that. Like, oh, let's split this off into a separate file called configuration machine. And you would hit a little button and it would turn, and it would put it off in that other file. And that would change it into an include. It's dangerous. I could cause some trouble with this kind of thinking. But that's the thing, is once you have all the tools in front of you, it's like, geez, you know, all the things you can do with this? That'd be pretty neat. Also, you may be wondering about the order here. It's not alphabetical, and it's also not related to the file order per se, but it's just, I sort of came up with an order that I figured would be a good default order, but I'm going to probably make a preference for it so you can change the order if you want and move them around. There may be a way to do an interface. We can have them drag and drop or whatever, the different sections, but they're just prefabs. Like, here's the names of the sections in the order that I think would be good to have. You know, the first thing you want is your info, and you know, then the next thing you want is like your machine, although I think I put machine name up in the info area. And so, you know, you kind of think of like, where would I rearrange things? So as I look at this, I'm like, oh yeah, you could drag these things around too. That's another interface thing you can do. Put it off to the side here. But yeah, there's so many weird ways you can make HTML do stuff that, you know, and forms, real full-scale web forms, do magic things. So that's exciting. I'm excited about getting into that aspect of it. Believe me, I will get back to the firmware and the motion system and other things. Input shaping and all of that stuff. This is really more about just a necessary step in wrangling a very large, as you can see, these files are huge, and they're only getting huger. You know, even when I collapse them, there's still, you know, all these TMC sections, you know. Although I'm going to, again, be hiding these based on what I can glean from the configs. And I'm going to look at both configs. I'm going to, like, if the thing is enabled in config H, then I'll look for it in config ADV. And if there's some conditional thing that's in between that this is looking for, I'll define it inside the configurator itself and just get that formalized. I mean, it won't be, I wanted to make things informal, like have rules. And so what I might do is just come up with a set of rules and then like pick those up out of another file, yet another file, just to like, that defines them as rules rather than sanity checks. But there's a lot I could do to convert sanity checks into rules and have them pre-created. That's kind of part of the thing, is like the same with the schema. It's like, once I've generated it, well, now it can just be manipulated any way you want. But just having it also be able to do that, but also absorb the settings from other configurations, that was a necessary step to get it together. And so, yeah, there's those all go together. They all go together in one big old thing. So I don't think it's so bad that I'm taking the time to do this. I don't know who else would, honestly. I mean, we have a lot of people who talk about various ideas, but they all have lives and other things going on, and kids and things like that. And I'm a confirmed, I guess, bachelor at this point. So these are my kids right here, Marlin, and the fun tools that go along with it. That being said, ooh, I might need to pee in a minute. How long are we going? Almost 2 hours? Okay, let's jump into the last bits of the implementation, at least the startup part, and we can get into the way the form works and that stuff. If you're into jQuery, that's part 2 of this whole little presentation, which I'm trying to keep light and obviously loose. So yeah, this whole thing gets called at that point, like when the custom text editor is opened. In fact, the register part, yeah, that happens here. We know when that happens. That happens as part of the plugin, as part of our extension getting initialized. So I should maybe make a note here from that about what happens. I think I put a little bit of a header, but this is like my first extension of this kind, so I should probably keep careful notes just to be a good student. Called by extension .js to thank you, Copilot. Copilot always knows what I want. I wouldn't say always, but it's getting really good. If people are worried about telemetry, let me tell you, Copilot is reading my mind. And I, for one, welcome our new robot overlords. It's saving me so much time on typing. I don't mind. Oh, I opened something which I guess is the merge editor, or oh no, I think I opened one of these preview panes. Damn it. It's one of the things that gets me confused in this clear file annotations. No! Ah! Ah! I know what I'll do. We'll close it and we'll reopen it. Hey, hey! Okay, I don't know what happened there exactly. I'm learning my way around this app. Was that fun or what? Yep, so, okay. Called by extension to register the provider. So yeah, we'll watch, let's watch Copilot do my typing for me, shall we? So the only last thing, I guess, a little detail on the WebView HTML itself. Neighbors are having a little row. R-O-U-T. Get to know that word. Everyone should know that word, because it's funny. So yeah, this is the WebView HTML. So first thing you have to do is use your get nonce to get like some kind of random thing, and I'm not sure what this means. 0, ABM get nonce parentheses. That's an interesting one. Huh. I guess there's something about the way it's, yeah, it's a strange one. If anyone can give me insight into what that is, I mean, I'll look it up, but that's an interesting one. Okay, so anyway, I'm using jQuery 3.3.1 because any arbitrary version of jQuery is better than no jQuery. Believe me, if you've worked with WebDOM, web's pages and web forms and Ajax and all that kind of stuff, like, yeah, you need to use jQuery. It's just don't don't use other methods. It should be built into the browser, honestly. Like some method like it should be built in because it's such a nice shorthand. But it works great. I mean, it's the fact that you can build it in the language is pretty cool. If you haven't used jQuery, I would check it out. Well, I'll give you a preview of it, of course, tonight. Over the next hour. So here we have a schema. So of course I want to include my schema.js, which I broke up. I'm breaking up my files into more things. I actually made a schema.js, which I guess I'm putting up in here. I guess things that I'm including from here, I'm putting up here in the JS file folder. And then stuff that is like more connected to the app, I'm keeping in just the ABM folder. So schema.js, that's why that's there, and that's why editor.js is outside of that. So yeah, the next bit is the style, so I have a CSS that I want to use. And so I just made little helpers for myself here, JS URI, Euresis UI, to just make it easier to get stuff. And I could have put them inside of here, declared them as functions. In fact, I had them that way earlier, but I was like, they're neater out here. And they also get access to the things they need, although I could have referred to the web view and stuff from within here, but it's just a little neater to have the HTML be down here. So once you've got that, I'm just returning again a backtick string full of substitutions of those things. And you just fill out a very basic HTML file, and all I really needed was, for simplicity, just put the form in here. I could build that in jQuery, but it's nice to have it expressed explicitly out here. Um, I guess the one thing about HTML that makes it wordy is just that you have to have closing tags like this. Otherwise, it's not too bad. You know, I mean, keywords are keywords are keywords. Things with properties and cascades inside intercontaining with each other. What more do you need? Um, but yeah, but I do have space for forms that are not created yet, like the config form. And of course, you put IDs on everything that you're going to use, and then you style them up to appear where you think they should appear. And you generally do things the way I've learned to do them in semantic order. If you want to have a header on a page or a footer or whatever, like you put the navigation, like even though the navigation appears visually on the page near the top or whatever, you can put it further down and get it out of the way for people who are like, need like screen readers or are blind or whatever. So there's various reasons for doing things in certain ways. And so you do things semantically, and you dress things up according to their meaning. You give them names according to what they are, like what they their role in the world, and then hopefully you don't have any markup inside your markup that says move left or go be in front or whatever. That's all handled by your CSS. And if you just design things with a little bit of foresight, you can get really good CSS, really clean CSS, and save yourself a lot of headaches. But generally speaking, using these days it's much easier to build stuff out. Anyway, a little tangent on that with HTML, but so you build out these things, and I've just put a filter field and all that, and is all styled by the CSS called Edit View CSS. Meanwhile, the last thing it does is, these are again static members. You create a static member called viewType that can be referred to once the thing is actually being run. And this console log is like, me. And then the last thing you do is you just create, because this is going to be loaded as a module, you have to give a reference to externally to the config editor provider. And it's interesting, it's exports dot and not module exports dot. I'm not sure what the distinction is, but when I've done stuff, depending on the type of thing, I have to use module dot exports dot. So I'm going to look into that and see if maybe exports is just an alias. But when I did my stuff earlier, I was using that. So what's the next bit? Oh, well, I guess the exciting part is the actual view itself. So this used to be a bigger mess, but not that it isn't still a good, interesting mess. But one of the things is that if you've worked with web apps, you know some of the weirdness of the way that scopes are created, and the way that objects are built is oftentimes you just declare a function, and then everything lives inside of this function. And then if you want to create that, instantiate the function or do whatever's in the function, you have to call the function. So yeah, you'll have something at the top where you do that. And so that's kind of what's going on here. In this case, we're actually using the jQuery method of waiting for the page to be ready, and then that calls this function. So you're guaranteed it won't be just run whenever it happens to be included in the page, which may not be when you want. So as we go through this, we'll just quickly scan, just down, because this is, when your web view loads, this actually loads just whenever, like the content gets loaded into the browser part of the, and displayed as it's getting ready to be displayed. This is actually, what gets run. Every time you either open a document or switch the document, this script actually gets executed. The other script is just hanging around, waiting around, but it may send messages based on the fact that the document changed or whatever. But when you switch views, it actually just does a full reload. So it gives the impression that basically you have no data. You have to wait. You have to get it from the state in the case of switching from a tab, or you have to wait for the message that sends it in the case of opening fresh. So either way, you're just, all you care about is setting up your view, and then you're guaranteed your view will be ready when this is called. But your other stuff, you should kind of like, you have to set it up to like wait for something to happen, or check that there's a state that you can really use, because either of those guarantee, either it's getting called and getting a message, or you have a state. Those are the two possibilities here. So here you've got, well, in the beginning, of course, I set up my string prototype. We'll just go through line by line. VS Code, you got to get that. And then I'm using jQuery. So again, here's how jQuery works. $, selector, in this case ID filter. And this will return everything with ID filter on the page. Of course, there's only one object with an ID of filter because that's how IDs work. They must be unique. And if they're not, you can get all kinds of weird behaviors. Be careful. So it gets so this gives us a jQuery object with this a reference to whatever this selected in a little array, and so it's ready to go when we need it. So that's all that jQuery does, is it gives you kind of like a little shorthand to get objects and select them using your standard selector methods that you find in your JavaScript or your browser implementation. But in this case, it was meant to be browser agnostic and conceal all those details, and also give you a much simpler way to do it. And it also includes chaining, which is the nice part. Anytime you have something that chains, it suddenly makes things like nicer, at least in the interface. And I love that aspect of it. So next we get the div for the config form. We have a reference to that. And then I'm declaring a bunch of things. We'll be needing, here's what we need. We need to save the filter, set the filter val. So that's just when we get it from some external place. We're going to set it in the window for convenience and later access. And then we're going to, because one of the things about storing in the window object is you don't have to declare anything. You just store it there, and you're good to go. And you can just ad hoc stuff things in your window object. I'm probably going to be using more like window.abm and fill that up with stuff. I don't know. We'll see. But anyhow, so as we go down, we're thing to set a filter value. We've got a thing. This is going to be the actual initializer. So I could just call this init, I guess, but this sets up all the event handlers on the form. And as I look down, I see it'd be good to look at this first. So first thing, make sure no forms are able to submit. That's one of the important things. These forms, we just want them to be interactive, but we don't want to be, when you hit return, we don't want the forms to like try to load something, which is what they typically do. They want to open some URL, and if the URL isn't set, it could just open blank. You just don't know. And in this case, actually, I found that if you submit forms within VS Code, it just goes nowhere. At least when I did it. So don't submit forms. So I set them simply to not submit. They return false. There's you could also do other things. You could call, suppress default handler or something like that. I forget what the exact name of it is, but Copilot could tell us. But this is how you do that again in jQuery. This means every form element, and it just binds this submit handler onto all of them. Simple. And then you have this bit here where we have a filter field, and I wanted to I wanted to basically time out. As you type stuff, it continuously cancels the timer that it started until you wait, and then it updates the page, just like your live search results boxes that you expect to do stuff. I could have it respond to every key press, but that would that might slow down your typing. So I don't know. Depends on how the browser works. But anyway, we have an itch on my elbow. Gotta get that sucker. Get that sucker. All right. We have a checkbox to show and hide comments in the editor, which I just called shower, right? And it does the show and hide bit, and that's just a checkbox. Again, whenever you want a form to have live behavior, you just bind some handler onto it, and the input handler is like it covers all the changes, so it seemed to work pretty well. There's probably other handlers I could bind onto it, like key up and stuff, but that didn't seem necessary once I had input on there. So with the shower, all it does is like if you change the checkbox, it just hides or shows the comments by toggling class hide on whatever it selects. In this case, it goes in the form div, finds comment, and for each it does toggle class find on it. I think actually I could probably get away with this instead. I think that would work. Form div find comment toggle class hide. Yeah. And I could decide that I think that should work. That should work fine, right? That's one of the things I don't have to reload. Yeah. I don't have to reload this when I edit it. I just have to switch tabs and come back, and I automatically get the updates. So it's a little faster turnaround cycle for developing this stuff. It's pretty quick, I gotta say, especially on the Ultra when I'm not streaming. Now we have an add button, and that's actually there isn't really an add button. There used to be a hello button on the page, and yeah, I made that one just say hello when you click on it, so I could make sure everything was still alive, basically. And it was early in the process to get used to these web views and this way of doing things. So that's it. That's all the config form does. It sets up the handlers, and that's the way, again, if you want apps to work, is like you want it to sit idle and wait for events or whatever to happen, and so that's what it's doing. Once you set it up, it's good to go. But there is more stuff to come, which is down here. This is where it calls init config form. So this loads as soon as this web view is loaded, which you don't know when it's gonna. You get a reference to your. Well, right away, the first thing I do is I actually add an event listener for our handle message, and then I init the config form. So I could do it the other way around, where I init the form first and then add the listener, and maybe that would prevent me from getting a message that I want. But I don't know if it matters. But it happens relatively quick. I mean, you saw how it's like less than a second to redraw the page or something like that. Like this is a fresh load with a longer file, I think. Yeah, okay, it takes about a second to refresh it, which is, on a modern system, but, that's what we're using. So the only other thing it does is it checks to see if you're switching back and it has a state. And if you do, then it can see if it has a filter, and it'll set that for us, because that's actually stored in the state in addition to being in the preferences. So I have 2 copies, I guess, but also the state that has it gets it from the preferences originally when it loads. So I'm going to take a look at that and make sure I'm keeping that in sync. That might have something to do with why it's not perfectly in sync when you do like switching back to the tab. We'll have to look. But sometimes it was. That was the thing. It's like, as long as it's set on the window, I think or set in the state, it should be fine. But when does it set the state? Actually, I have it set state anytime you make a change in the file. And also, it's supposed to set the state when you make a change in the filter, because it stores But the one thing about that which sucks is that when you set the state, you have to set both. But I do believe the state is keeping a reference to the object, maybe, and not in order to keep it alive, basically, rather than a copy. Not that the object copy is like a huge thing. I don't know. I mean, we're talking about such strange, small amounts of data in a way. I'm almost not used to it. It's just I can't get used to the fact that we have so much wealth of power now. But I worry about like how much is it using? Is it going as quickly as it can? And next week they'll make an update to VS Code to make it twice as fast or something, and I'll be like, okay, well, that was good effort, but now everything's twice as fast, so why do I care? Just get it working and then worry about the speed later. So in any case, I have this little thing which just init the view with stored data to remind me that yes, you switch tabs, and no, it didn't come from some weird location or happen at some other time when you didn't expect. It always only happens when you switch tabs back to it, having put the tab away. So, yeah, I guess I'll just comment that because I'm starting to get a lot of clutter. All right, that's it. So that's it again for initialization on a web view. You create a listener so you can start to get your messages. You init your form, which just sets up your handlers. You check to see if you have a state. If you do, then I can actually use the data to rebuild the form, rebuild config form here, data. Or if I don't, then I'll get a message called update, and it'll send me the whole text of the file, and I'll actually, because I don't have access to the text of the file in the web view at all. That's one of the weird things about it, is like the provider has the text, the web view just has the view and little resources and access to the VS Code, so it can you can get messages basically. Just enough to get messages, that's about it. So again, is it sending a copy? Is it sending the original? When it's a text file this size, does it matter? I guess I don't know. I guess if you were working with other types of files, that's the question too, is like, what do you end up with? A copy or the original? It's a question. So either way, and then we have our filter message and we have our error message. So that's the whole setup of the thing. And so to rebuild the config form with text is pretty short. We have a message to the console, which I'm going to change these to debug, so I'm not looking at them all the time, but I also can turn them on and off at will. Okay, I don't have to comment them out and all that. Look at these. Look at all these comments. I've really been debugging a lot and trying to understand everything. So anyway, so what do? Well, first thing I do is I store the reference to the data that I get from extract config with the text in the window. So that's the first thing. I extract the config, and I have this data. Now I could put this again in a global in this file. I just was experimenting and trying to figure out where was a good place to store things ad hoc. And now that I have this, I'm like, okay, well, I can work with it. So I'll do that. And then I also create a little list of the sections so I can access those elsewhere as well. And that all comes from the extracted data, and that I just got and put in window data. So yeah, it all feels a little weird. So what else happens? So that's pretty much that. The extraction is enormous, and if you've looked at it before, which I went through a whole thing before of how I turn the data into a form, but it's surprisingly small, and that's kind of the part I want to show you next, is how small it ended up being. So after I've got the text and I've got the sections, I save the data to the state, which just basically saves the state with both the data and also the filter. Whatever the filter happens to be set on the window at that time is what it saves. So if you think about it, this is going to get called whenever you get an update of the text, but also at initial update. So if you haven't got the filter by the time you get here, then you lose the filter. So that was the thing I was concerned about. And if you don't send the filter, at some point you never have the filter. So can it be sent and guaranteed to be received first here? And that's a yes, because I send the filter message first and then I send the update message. So where's it getting lost? We'll see. Maybe we'll figure that out. I was hoping to get more into the filtering of the form tonight, but I think what's probably happening is I'll fade out in about half an hour and just finish up this summary, because this is really the more interesting stuff. And then when I get into that part, that's going to be just a lot of fiddling and trying things, and the actual coding part, which maybe you're into. So I'll do that tomorrow in an earlier stream while you're at work. I'll be at work right here doing all this. So that's all that. Handle message, rebuild config with text, and state handling. So again, when do I set the state? I set the state whenever I get the text, and as soon as I've first converted the data, because I need an initial state. Then, when I'm modifying the data in the form, I actually am modifying the structure that we've gathered and I'm not doing anything to the form except letting the fields do their own update thing. I'm just reading what's in them. And then I'm also setting a dirty flag, which I'm going to reflect in the form by changing like the color of the label, so you've modified something. That'll make it easier to tell when you've modified stuff. And then I guess I'll probably clear that when you save or get a message that the document is reloaded or whatever. I'll clear those. But they'll stay red as long as you haven't saved. And I guess that would count even if you one thing I could do is maybe use do an MD5 hash on the whole thing, just so I can check to see if it matches what it started with, just so I can tell we did an undo and it took out all the changes, so that doesn't count anymore. But doing it on a line by line basis, I don't know, that gets a little. Then I would be comparing line by line to see if it should be cleared and stuff. And I don't know, it could do it, I suppose, but these forms are big and they're just ridiculous. I gotta hide the options that are irrelevant first, and then we'll worry about, and then they'll be reduced to a couple dozen. I'm serious, there's so many options, but I mean, you don't need them most of the time, and that's why it's initially we did think to split them up into multiple files, but it's no, we got to pass these things around and support them and kind of maintain them and then have multiple configs, and it's if we had 10 files, it would just be impossible. And combining them into one was also impossible due to the way that they were set up with conditions and stuff. So 2 it is, but while we have these 2 and we're stuck with them, we can build a better way around them and maybe just generate them in the long run. And it is building. I know it's sort of like kicking a dead horse. You feel like you're building a leg on top of a legacy. You're putting the roads where the cow paths were. I get it. But there is some wisdom to following those well-worn cow paths, but I won't try to take that analogy too far. Oh, maybe it's this thing, references. Okay, that's an interesting one, references. So, have I ever used that before? References? I don't know if I have. So, now for the fun part. Not just rebuild config form, but yes, rebuild config form. And as I promised, it is mercifully short. It's only this many lines, from 277 down to 395. So we got 120 lines to deal with. And then I can take 120 minutes break. catch up on my Netflix or something. I don't know what. But hey, so what do we do? Well, let's just go down the list and we'll look at some more of that fun jQuery. Some of it gets pretty cool, I guess. So first thing we have is we create a thing called doReveal, which is a handler, and that handler or function, which I guess I could have declared it as a function doReveal, and I did at one point, but I was like, I like this format, let's do it this way. So that's what this is. All this does is just it checks if this does the reveal on the when you click on one of the headings. So that's what takes care of this behavior. So all I've done is just created doReveal, and when this is called, it passes the event and something called class, which I guess is the parent field set of the thing the field set that's associated with the legend that you clicked on. So I could actually be using parent here. At some point, I thought I'd need class names and use those, but the more you can avoid having to do that, the better. Like if you can have a common class that's like the parent, guaranteed to be the parent of the thing. The way I ended up doing it was instead of I ended up putting, well, like with well, you'll see, but you'll see when I get to it. But yeah, so this is one way to do a selection. I decided, okay, well, I'll just use field set dot whatever, and I'll pass that class name, and that's going to be the parent class. That's going to be the field set that pertains to the option, and then I'll set that up as on the field of on the legend or something. I guess on the legend itself. So, yeah, it turned out that it's not always the best way. So, yeah, if you can find a selector that selects something that's consistently inside the container that you're making, that's always better, simpler, nicer, cleaner. But the nice thing this does is it checks if your Alt key is pressed and does the multi-collapse instead. So instead of selecting, FS, it selects all the field sets. So it looks to me like I could probably get away with, the other thing it does is it does want to look at the field set you clicked on to know whether it should collapse all or expand all, because it bases it on what you clicked on. So that's about it, and then it just adds class or removes class, collapsed. Turns out there's a thing called toggle class, and you can put a state after it, and you don't need that anymore, which I kind of forgot somewhere along the way. I've already applied that in a couple of other places. So then you have, let's create a form. So this is a cool thing in jQuery. Again, if you want to declare a form, you just do it this way. This is give me a jQuery object with a form, so I can use your jQuery methods to deal with it. And so you now have a brand new form, and now I'm just going through the object entries of the data, which it gives you in a pair situation. This is equivalent to, again, Python. It's very Pythonish. I think people who like Python have been working on JavaScript lately, because it's very much, I mean, again, so much of this was, not this particular thing, but a lot of it came from Python translation, and I found the process to be really, really painless. Comparatively painless, let's say. So anyway, I actually have a real log method here that I can use, so that's what I'm doing there. So in each case I'm looking at, I get a section which is the key, and so actually the data that I got scraped is all indexed by key. So the first thing you see is like all the sections form the top level, which is reflected in the form as well. I didn't necessarily have to go that way. Obviously you can do so many different ways of selecting data and stuff, but it just turns out to be easier to organize it into sections and then build on those, and that's what I'm going to continue to do. And yeah, I mean, I could get custom icons instead of these emojis, but like, what does the 8-ball mean for G code? I don't know. I just find it to be whatever. It's an 8-ball language, man. Anyway, so the next thing we do is very basic stuff. I'm creating the field set that's going to encompass all the stuff in this section, and I give it a class which is based on the section. And I used my string override to create an ID out of the section name, so it like replaces the spaces with dashes and stuff to give it something that works in HTML world. And then I grab my emoji, which I just added, and then I do my revealer, which does the whole spiel. So I could remove that and move it here. And that's just the legend. So I put the revealer on the legend of the sections. So that's what this is, a legend. And the emoji actually makes it a little wider, so it makes a bigger target. They were a little less targety. Like if I click right up here, nothing. But if I click down here, I'm good. So we've got our revealer, and that's all that does is it just has a thing, and then it gets a so it's the legend, and it actually puts it on the span, the section title span. So I really could get rid of the name of that and just say span. But if I want to put more spans in here, that would mess things up. So for now, one span. And so yeah, all this does is just then I have this inner thing, which is another div, and this is the actual div that gets hidden and shown. So the legend stays visible, so it's not like hiding the whole. You wouldn't want to hide everything plus the legend, so it's just hiding the stuff, and it ends up looking like boop boop. But you can do because I'm using hide, or I'm just setting the visible state on it rather than use hide, because I'm setting a class rather than use hide, because hide is a little weirdly unpredictable and it's harder to track, and also it's harder to select things that are hidden because I don't know, it just seems like it's slower. Thing is hidden, I mean, maybe the browser can do that quickly, but who knows? Seems slow to me, or slower, or weirder. It's certainly messier to type, so. So anyway, this just does a thing where it finds the section title and it makes the revealer is the legend and the span is the first child. So I could just say, revealer first child, select first child or whatever. But so this sets a click handler on every one that it finds, one of them, and all that does is just calls do reveal. And do reveal is that little thing up here, which I probably had as self-contained inside here before, but I think I probably wanted to give it a work on it independently in case it was tricky, because I had things to do, so it may get absorbed in here later, but it's fine for now. So then what we're looking at, now we need to look at the keys that are inside that section. So we're just going through the entries in the dictionary, which I call dictionary. It actually is the contents of the section. And so each entry definitely has a key name, and then it has some data, which could be an array, or it could be a single entry. But there should only be one within each section, but I realized there could be multiple ones, so I need a way to deal with that. Because of the way I've rearranged the data, it's kind of made things messy. Because it doesn't necessarily fall. Well, you can see as I'm creating the form, it's going to put all of the ones that were in there in the one after another, which they may not be in that order at all. So I have to preserve the original page order, the original order in the form or in the config file. And so this little convenience of putting it in an array is cool, but it screws things up. So I think what I might end up doing is making the key have like braces and a number on it, so that it's identifiable as being a different one. And then I'll just have to do key selection differently, which will be interesting, but I think that'll work because it'll keep things where they're supposed to be. So yeah, you have to kind of work it out. But what I've done in the meantime, I just said, well, you do the customary thing. You make a thing into you have it transform itself into an array, and you put all the things in an array instead. So that's what I ended up doing. And so that, unfortunately, yeah, loses the structure. So, whoops. But also, the fact that I'm putting them in sections also loses the structure. It takes things that might be way down the page and groups them all together. So, it was handy to have sections, but now it's become like, yeah, okay. The cool thing is you don't have to move things around in the files to move them around in the form, which I think is cool, because now, we can actually just put more and more sections in, I mean, until it gets ridiculous. And not that it's not ridiculous already, but yeah, and that could be our approach to organize things. And then later, after that we've decided this is the order and this is how things are, then you can utilize these tools again to drag and drop them into, or export them into new files. Now all those facilities are here, and I have the ability to send commands. Like, one thing a web view can do is it can say VS Code send command and tell another, plugin to do something. So you have all that power right in your web view, and that's another way we could probably do some things, is like send commands to each other. But I don't know. I mean, the messaging works better than sending a command. A command is a bigger deal. It's more like, extension wide. And who knows, maybe there's an option where you can have extensions only initialize once something sends a command. Does that make any sense? No, probably doesn't, because you have to register them, right? Okay, anyhow, so many ideas. So little time, so much caffeine. Next, so this gets a little weird. So I do the thing where I just get the first element for now. I'm gonna fix this. This makes it broken. So yeah. So the first thing I do is I use this concept of a defaults, and I fill them in with default values for fields that I don't know if they're there or not. And then I use info to mix them up and put them together in a thing called info. And this is the new syntax in JavaScript for making your, mixing up your objects. So that's pretty cool. And then I get some properties, out of that. What's the enabled? What's the value? What's this, type? Blah, 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 blah. Is it a switch? What's the class? Should I put array on the end? And then I do a little logging, see how I did. And then create a div, a label, a span, and an input, and put them all together. And should it be disabled and things like that, which makes it look dimmer, but not actually disabled. And then you have so this is just how you do it in jQuery. You take this thing, this object, and you append, which means put inside at the end. Make it the last thing inside the first level of the object. Do the same thing with the span. And then I put the line label on the div. And yeah, so you can mix it all up once the line label has been built. You do all that. So pretty cool, pretty cool. And this can be done in pretty much any order. I kind of like to put things all together before I add them into the page or form or larger thing that I'm building. So that's just a style question. Probably works the same. It's all references, right? So then again, if it's not a switch, I can do some more complicated things. Like if it's a switch, you're just going to have the one checkbox and that's it. But if it isn't a switch, you're going to have an input field of some kind. So that's what we decide. We got to figure out what kind of inputs we're going to have, and then we put handlers on them. So it all works kind of pretty much the same way you remember. You create your label, and then again, you can specify properties, and some of these can be attributes, I guess, because you can specify a value, whether it's checked, and its type. So these are all attributes. Class, text. Yeah, text actually is the contents, so it's actually not an attribute. It just goes in. So that's how I get that high-low thing. I create a couple spans with just putting text low and text high. It probably comes up, it might be a CSS thing. contents or whatever. I'll have to check it out and see what the markup looks like. I think it just puts text on the page, as I do recall. Then you got, so I got my T class, which is basically, what type is it? And if I know the type, I can add a class to a text field and have it behave differently. So that's what I do, is I have one handler for text fields to check like whether they're correct or not. And then just when I get there, I just check see if they have a certain class on them. Although I could create separate handlers for each class, but it's like, why? Have one handler and just deal with them all, and that's one place. So that's all done there, and so after it's done, one of these gets a bind. There it is. Handle bool field. So these all get bound to something. This one gets bound to a checkbox. That one gets bound to a bool field. That one also. So that's just handlers for these to do the things that they're supposed to do. So in the case of this, it's handling the line checkbox for enabling and disabling the option. So that's a little different from just handling a generic checkbox. That's why I have handle bool field on these checkboxes, because they're a little different. So I probably should call this something else besides just handle checkbox, but in this case, I changed the others to look like these sliders instead. Oops. Again, that page reload screws it up the first time, but then it's fine. Weird. So anyway, yeah, I put these in place of the regular widgets so that they wouldn't stand out as being checkboxes, and it makes it better. And it is better. And yeah, I'm going to definitely make these dirty. Maybe I can make them dirty in a way that's like shows whether they were disabled before, like have an orange and a red or something, like value changed as red and enabled changed as like, I don't know, when it went from off to on it becomes green or something, or on to off it's red. I don't know. We'll figure something out. I'll figure something out. It'll be good. So yes, this is pretty much what's going on here. It's just like it checks to see if the thing is a state, builds it one way. So that's what happens down here, is like it checks to see what type of thing it is, and then it just builds little different interfaces for each type. So with it, if it's not a switch, then it puts in like, oh, it's a state. A state is high and low, so it's a pin state basically. There's also an option for a pin being a setting, so it kind of like, it doesn't do any validation on it, but it knows, or it sort of knows if it's a pin, because the name of the option ends in pin, basically. That's kind of just decides that's a pin. I assume that's a pin. So yeah, there's a lot of weird assumptions here, because this is like definitely, it's not like an app you could ever take and run with any config that you built or whatever, but you could definitely apply the same principles to any configuration.h, or whatever .h file that does this, defines, and then has them in a cascade. This has a lot of specialization, but it's meant to be a bridge, and it is a lot of work. But that's the thing, is it would be a lot of. It's going to be more work if I just don't do this and let everything languish forever. So let's do this. That's what I say. Let's do this. Just do it. So yeah, you got state, label, input, div. So that's this whole like construction here actually was derived from a JS Fiddle sketch that showed how to make one of these widgets, which you can find easily by searching for them. I mean, it took me a second to like find. I was like, I need one of those slider things that hides a checkbox. And I was like, where is it? And if you watched my stream, you saw me struggle with it, but I finally did get it working perfectly. But it was a bit of a hassle to get it set up. And so this one is a state. This one's a bool. Same idea, but with less. It doesn't have the spans. So I could maybe make some shared code there, but I mean, jQuery makes it so small. Look at that. It's so tiny. It's so great. So again, add class if it's got a type, put class on it. I guess in a way I could put that at the end on all these, I noticed. But I was like, well, I gave them different names, and they all have their own blocks where they exist. I'm like, screw it. Again, I'm not too worried about saving a few lines of code here and there like I used to be. I want to get this thing working and done. And in general, I have to say, with the help of Copilot and just, really being methodical, it has gone quickly, I just had to really just get it started and really dive in and get this, get a handle on this whole idea of custom editors. What? So there's a little trick I do here, which is just when I get if I notice that there are options in the thing, then I can make a pop-up menu. So, or if there's two options or whatever, I could make like, radio buttons or, something like that. You can definitely make, like I could check the whether, what the interface looks like and say, oh, well, this seems the better choice, just make radio buttons, which could appear in different ways. You can have it appear as a widget with sections. Many ways to do that sort of thing. We have a bit of wide space, so it's like you can have it appear one way when it's, when it's wide, and then have it appear a different way when it's narrow. So lots of interesting ideas there. So yeah, I'm going to keep working these out. In any case, I found that I discovered that I can't just parse the JSON that I have inside the config files because it's all badly formed. You can't use single quotes. You can't have things that aren't quoted at all. It's like ridiculous how tough JSON is sometimes. So I just decided I'll just fix all the problems with some replacements and until they pass. And yeah, I got it. So I was pretty careful to deal with the situations that we actually have. And I did write all kinds of comments for these when I was doing it, but now it's like, what is this? And just trust me, these regular expressions right here will clean up your JSON enough to parse if you make really bad loose JSON. So as I did, I made really bad loose JSON. This just makes sure to use the single and double quotes in the right places and checks for certain weird cases, and yeah, it's very basic, and it does, check if it matches, do this replace, then check this and do that, and so these can compound. And it is a perfect example of like using logic where just a regular expression, like I could never do this with one single regular expression. People try that stuff and it's like, I've been through that, and trust me, you want more of that Turing logic, trust me. You want more of that completion. So anyway, this is the case where we create a select, we give it a name, and in this case I remembered that when you create a dictionary object, like the name of the key will be the name of the thing, and if you leave it out. So I just put name in there. Sue me. Like it's easy to like get that mixed up with a bracket, like a brace covered, I guess they're called brackets, array, but whatever. So now it's good enough to parse. So I actually parse it. I think I was trying to use eval or something before, and that definitely didn't work. Although I think actually eval is looser than JSON parse. Like if you're using JSON parse, actually it's much more strict. One of the things I had was that I was pretty sure I could get rid of all my use of eval. Like, oh, I'll just when I get to the conditions part and looking at the requirements and running all those enabled strings and things, I won't worry about it. I'll just run my, I'll go through and I'll parse that thing and I'll say, oh, that's enabled. Now we have to figure out, is it enabled? And we go off and we'll replace that with a 1, and then eventually I'll have something that I can, whittle down, and then I'll parse that, and it's like, all that work is already been done just by eval, So all I have to do is just clean it up enough, turn it into something with a little searching and replacing, which I would have to do anyway. I have to interpret it all at some level. So it's like, well, if I can turn it into something which is parsable as JavaScript, then that's the way to go. And it turns out that I could, again, I've already followed that pattern, and it was like, I might as well just see what, because when you're trying to do especially like nested parentheses and stuff, it gets hairy. I mean, I don't want to have to build trees of to deal with that. So, no, thank you. Onward. So the cool thing is, we're again looking at the thing. First, we check to see if the options we got after we parsed it turn out to be an array, and if they are, then you're good. And if they're not, then it assumes you've got a dictionary instead, and then checks for that. So yeah, that's all it basically does, and then it just basically fills out the option tags with the values and text that are set in the in here. And the one thing I do is I just check. What do I do here? I remove any digits at the front, I guess. I think I had an issue where that was a thing. Oh, non-digits. Any non-digit at the front. Oh, if it's just a non-digit. I see. If it's nothing but so if it's a single letter. I gotcha. Yeah, this was oh, it says right there. Well, anyway, yes. For a single letter char that's not a number, we assume that you want a char. So that's only the case where something was like, in braces with letters that were loose. And that's interesting, yeah. Because the way it works is that the JSON that we end up with is like, if there's something was supposed to have quotes, it tries to keep that. But it knows the difference between, what, and generally speaking, when things are in quotes like that, they like, we have to figure out should they be quoted or not. And it's like double quoting inside the config file just seems messy and unnecessary, but yeah, I don't know. Anyhow, yeah, in the case of a dictionary, it can do it just by getting the value from the opt, and text is just the label. So that's how that works. Really simple. And again, we bind it to change, and the change event, yep. And oops. And that just calls handle select field, which is a little different from handling the others, in that it has to get the value. Let's see what it's doing. Handle select field, if it has of course, if it has a type, it puts it on there, and then it appends it. So yeah, same deal. And then the only other thing is, if we don't know what it is, we just make a big old text field, and then we put a type on it, and then that type will determine its behavior. And then also I bind it to handle edit field on change and on key up, although I guess I could bind it to input, and that would do the trick too. We could try that. But yeah, so that's all that does, so that when you go to edit something, it checks. I haven't got it verifying everything, like it doesn't verify this, like these are weird loose lists. So I could call it a list. If something has a commas in it, but it doesn't have braces, then it's a list, and then this, like, these are the values that are valid for each of these, but it doesn't necessarily express the fact that, this is what it is. So yeah, there's certain things I can annotate on here, like the type and stuff. But anyway, and then I can put hovers on things. Let's hide these comments for a minute. So yeah, as we go down, you can see that is and they all have their types attached to them. So many numbers. Like these, definitely, again, they should all be hidden when you're not using the thing that you need to use. It's like someone can come along and be like, where's the option? Like, turn on the thing, and you'll see it. And here we have, yeah, there's that widget. It's almost Christmassy. That's probably called enum. But yeah, this is a case where, this would be a good place to put the options that are allowed and have a drop down. And so you can, this actually is a nice thing because I can now start to see where it needs help, and I can just go into the config and just put my blinders on and just fix it up for this UI and just get it to that stage where this becomes, you know, the conduit. Oh, I didn't know the narrow view had this ability. Oh, that's cool. Okay, that's kind of handy. The centered layout, man, get to know it. So yeah, this allows you to put an F on the end, but not in the middle. So yeah, I've got pretty decent handlers for this, but it keeps the selection so the cursor kind of jumps a little weird.